So listen, this is a great time to have you on. I'm so excited to have Dr. Christina Jackson on from Rutgers Camden University. We met many years ago when you were down in Stockton. So
Right, right.
we met, I think, at a Black Lives Matter event you were having down. You had some students at a church in Atlantic City.
Oh, I had you. I thought the first time was in my classroom, but you're
Oh,
right. I was one of the people in the core team of Black Lives Matter Atlantic City. So
yeah.
okay, I didn't remember that.
Yeah, that's where I first met you. And it
Oh,
was
probably
like,
in the housing month.
it was the housing month. I was down there doing some work
Okay,
because our racial justice work around housing when I was the deputy director of Fairshire Housing Center.
right.
And and you were there with all these students, and I thought you were a student. I was like, well, who's these young people? I was like, oh, you this? No, this is my class. I was like, oh shit. But that was and we've known each other for ever since for quite a while. We were running
Right.
into each other at different shows.
Yep.
And recently, not long ago, I had you as one of our final night with Dr. King event. We were a panelist
Yep.
talking about Dr. King's final night and what the economic impacts of, if he was still alive, if he
Right.
wasn't assassinated, what would it look like, the economic issues that he was really working on to the end of his life.
Right. Yeah.
And you do this very much similar work, your work and your background in sociology and all other things we'll get into too. Just, you're such a brilliant professor. I love your work.
Thank you.
So tell us about like your upbringing, where you're from, where you grew up, what was your home like? Do you have siblings?
Yeah. So I'm from Mount Airy. Northwest Philly, and but actually I was born in Compton. So when people have the straight out of Compton shirt,
Uh-huh.
I'm like, you aren't really, but I am. But I was completely raised here in Philly,
Really?
and so yeah, we grew up there, and my elementary school was right across the street. And I lived with my mom and dad and my two brothers. I'm in the middle. I
Oh,
have an
you're the
older
middle
brother and a
child.
younger brother. And I'm kind of the radical of the family, I'm sure we'll talk about later. But yeah, I grew up with my mom and dad and my brothers up until about 11, and up until that time, we were still very deep in the church, which I'm sure we'll discuss. And then my parents separated,
Mhm.
and things got a little rough after that. And it was my brothers mostly, and my mom and my dad sometimes helping out, but
Mhm.
he was struggling with some mental health issues. And he eventually passed away when I was
Mhm.
in high school. And yeah, so family life was definitely hanging with our extended family, going to church quite a bit, and just in kind of community life in Mount Airy.
So you grew up in Mount Airy. Was race talked about in your home? Because I specifically, so if you're from the Philly area, you got to know, back in the day, if you had a girlfriend who lived in Mount Airy
Oh
and she
yeah.
was light skinned, too, like shit, you was the shit, like light skinned living in Mount Airy,
I
like
just heard about this. They were like, "Oh,
yes,
you're uptown." I was like, "What?
yes.
Uptown?"
So the dynamics around color and did that play a role in your home or growing up? Did you talk about race and?
Right. Well, later I realized that who I represented when I started living in other parts of the city. But at the time, yeah, my family, um, it was very important to my father to identify as Black
Mhm.
because my family's also mixed as well.
Mhm.
And my dad, his family, well, I'll say my mom was mixed. Her mother was white and her dad was Black. And so we always grew up as identifying as Black, but having a mixed family.
Mhm.
And to me, and in Mount Airy, that was normal,
Mhm.
ish, right? And then as I got older, I started to realize a lot of those built-in privileges
Mhm.
in Mount Airy, and that's actually kind of what got me interested in neighborhood inequality and being an urban sociologist. But yeah, initially we learned about that, and my family came from Compton. My dad grew up in San Pedro, and,
Mhm.
and my mom. And so there was always this kind of Black uplift mentality, doing better than our previous generations,
Mhm.
but it wasn't necessarily mixed in with being better than
Mhm.
other like lower class Black folks. So that was interesting because as I got older, I saw some of that
Yeah.
in Northwest Philly,
Yeah.
right? Of folks that were maybe associated with more of the private schools. I'm
Mhm.
not going to say any names, but some of these
Oh yeah.
private schools up there. Um, And so later I began to find out that I was very much in a kind of lower middle class, but
Mhm.
kind of on the edge
Mhm.
because our house went up for bankruptcy.
Mhm.
And so I think it gave me a very interesting experience.
Did that
Yeah.
lead you into, like, how did you get into wanting to study sociology? I mean,
Yeah, that's a good question. I started going to Temple, but even before then, I was always writing in my journal, still am, about things that bothered me. So I would read
mhm.
the newspaper, sometimes in church, and I would, cut out the clippings and
Mhm.
put it in my book and write about really heavy stuff, right? I
Mhm.
remember about like infant mortality and issues that were dealing with Kensington, as I was nestled in Mount Airy,
Mhm.
right?
Dealing
And
with issues in Kensington?
well, I would read the newspaper,
Oh, okay.
and I just remember that there was, just a couple news items that
Mhm.
came out and things that were happening to families or kids, and I just felt I wanted to be involved. So I
Mm.
initially started writing down notes and things like that, and writing wound up being one of my ways to express myself that I learned. And on my way to Temple, when I would drive to Temple University, I would see how vastly unequal things were.
Mhm.
And it could be three blocks over.
Yeah.
I mean.
Yeah.
And I started going to Temple, taking some sociology classes and other courses, and it just expanded my mind. I had the
Mhm.
traditional experience in which I went to college and it really expanded my mind. And it allowed me to then look back at my family situation
Mhm.
and my dad trying to run up his own
Mhm.
business and where things got difficult and why. And I think that that's what got me into wanting to study more unequalness in urban cities, particularly with Black families.
It's interesting because I grew up in Logan,
Oh, okay.
but my parents refused to send me to the neighborhood school, so I was
Right.
shipped. I would catch the bus up to Frankfort High School. So I went to Frankfort High School
Oh,
up the
wow. Okay.
Northeast, and went to Edmonds Middle School. Was not far from Frankfort. And like you, I would be on the bus traveling from North Philly up
Mhm.
to the Northeast, seeing the stark difference in how the neighborhoods and communities were looking.
Right.
You've done research around that. So space is something that we don't talk about, the built physical environment
Right.
and what that looks like. So tell me a little bit about how'd you get into studying that and understanding the complex issues around inequality and equality around space.
Absolutely. So, like I said, it was originally brought to my attention as I was commuting.
Mhm.
And then I got into graduate school and, I was like, what do I want to study? I was really interested in studying different like cultural movements in the city. And then it happened to be that my mentor was doing research studying the Black community in San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
And so I wound up going up there with her and doing some of the research there. Um, at the time, she was studying gang injunctions and the impact of that on the community.
Mhm.
But for me, I was kind of learning as a field student, learning about ethnography
Mhm.
and relationships with communities. Um, and through that, I began to realize that there was a big battle, an environmental justice battle
Mhm.
at the shipyard in San Francisco. And so there was this battle around power, around how it would be redeveloped. There was
Mhm.
also an issue of it being very toxic. It's a Superfund site.
Oh, wow.
So, for others, it's on the list of the nation's top environmentally hazard environments in the country. And so I started studying the social movement there. And so from there, and obviously here in Philly as well, I was in on a couple of like different types of movements and things. And I began to realize that it really meant a lot to me to understand how racism and classism literally created the grooves in the track of
Mhm.
our cities to be unequal. And so then I went forward and started studying the impact of segregation and redlining in particular. And I learned actually quite a bit of this from you when you came to my classroom, and
Yeah.
because learning about fair share was
Mhm.
was big as
Mhm.
well. And so that's when I started, prior, I started becoming more interested in studying the impact of that. Right?
Yeah.
People are like, "Well, it's over." Right? You
Mm.
got the Fair Housing Act.
Mm.
You, you know,
Yeah, it's
it's
over. Yeah.
over.
Yeah, sure.
Right, and then but yet we drive around on the bus
Mhm.
and, in our cars.
Mhm.
And not even that, it's the difference is not it, it's the experiences for children and
Yeah.
families, right? That really got me.
It's so funny because when you grow up in these communities and you're moving around the city and you're seeing the difference, some of us pay attention and some of us don't.
Right.
And I think for me, it was more me just being observing. I'm like, oh, this is weird. This is strange. And then, really growing up in a very conservative home. I grew up in a very religious, conservative home.
Okay.
So religion played a role in my shaping my understanding about conservatism because I knew it. And you said you went to church. So what type of church was it? Was it Baptist, Pentecostal? What type of church did you grow up in?
Right. So I went to a non-denominational church,
Mm-hmm.
actually, a really big church in Northwest Philly that was like African American and Guyanese
Oh,
American,
wow.
actually. And interestingly, my family itself was very democratic, but my church was kind of, I wouldn't say conservative,
Mm-hmm.
right? There were a lot of liberals that went there, but it definitely had Rick Santorum come, and I didn't realize that till later. I was
Yeah.
writing my notes in my journal, like, "Oh, Rick Santorum's here. He's saying some things. Some things I agree, some things I don't."
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that let me know that I don't know how they would identify as a church, but definitely
Mm-hmm.
having some conservative aspects to it.
Mm-hmm.
But it generally had a very liberal population. Yeah.
Wow. And what was your home like? The politics of your home? What was it
Mhm.
like? Was it?
Very democratic. Yeah, we grew up, but Mount Airy was, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Northwest Philly is very democratic in general, very liberal, very, excited about Obama and,
Mm-hmm.
all
Mm-hmm.
the type of associated politics with that. And so, yeah, I was just raised like that. I wouldn't say that we didn't participate in anything like political, my family, other than voting. Um, just trying to think if there were anything. So not as much,
Mm-hmm.
right? But we definitely were a democratic family, and really had a passion for taking care of people,
Mm-hmm.
right?
And most traditional faiths talk about that, but sometimes it doesn't play out that way in practice. For
Mhm.
instance, our podcast, is talking about race, religion, and politics,
Mhm.
and people say you shouldn't talk about these issues, right? You
Mhm.
study and research and teach these issues, so why do you think this is a topic? These topics we should be talking about.
Right, right. Well, I think that I'm trying to think. At least I tend to just be a very integrated person in general, right?
Hmm.
So as an urban sociologist, we study the impact of the city, and I, read these studies and I read people that came before, and they very much look at the economic relationship
Hmm.
between people and their cities, which is interesting, and we get a lot of information from that. But as I was spending time in communities growing up and doing my research, I realized that there's another component. There's more of a subjective experience
Hmm.
with these institutions, with the welfare system,
Hmm.
with our cities, with our parks,
Hmm.
with our schools, which is
Hmm.
a whole nother topic, that was different than what I was reading. And so, in general, I find that we need to look at different topics and issues of the day in a more integrated way. And so I try to bring, my book that's going to be coming out next year really talks about how to heal the city, right?
Hmm.
How to create a more like integrated ecosystem, right? Where that's not driven by unequalness,
Hmm.
right? That people have a fair share, right,
Hmm.
of the resources in the city, and so that's kind of important to me to be able to get all sides of that. So I think that faith and people's commitment to the city and to each other that needs to have a place in urban planning
Hmm.
and politics, right? But we look at it as very much politics over here, or religion over here, but
Hmm.
never together.
Yeah.
And I feel like that we miss a lot by keeping those topics in silos.
Yeah, I mean, they're one and the same. And so I
Right.
think having these discussions about these particular three important topics are key to really moving the conversation towards more understanding as we talk about.
Right.
And you've done your research is not just academic, but you have a huge part of your research is storytelling.
Hmm. Hmm.
Tell a little bit about that because you're in these communities, getting
Hmm.
recording
Hmm.
these folks, interviewing these folks. What is that
Right.
like? What is the discussions about? Like, how does that feel?
Right. Well, I just realized as I was growing up that I loved being in community.
Hmm.
So I was actually identified as an activist or organizer before I got into academia. And I didn't really know this until later that I was into story. Now I put the label storytelling on it, but before it was just really capturing the stories of people in different type of situations. And I was captivated by it. It's probably because my mom used to read to us, and I was really captivated by people's story and how it dictated the choices that they make. And so, originally I was just kind of in on Girl Scouts, or I would go to, different things in my church or Kwanzaa's, just community things, and feel good in those type of spaces. And then when I got into graduate school, I hear about this thing called ethnography, which allows you to really study just kind of ordinary life. And I used a lot of participant observation, where I would be in on communities, right? And not in secret, right? They knew who I was. But I did have to learn about some of the power dynamics in that space and how I would represent a particular institution as well. But it's always been important to me to um, work side by side with grassroots groups and communities, first and foremost. And then academia came in as being a really good container for me to be able to teach, right? Be able to be involved in particular types of activism, right? And, which is very important to me, publishing
Wow.
and writing.
So is there a particular story that you can share that really, moved you or took you a different direction or surprised you? Because you've been in many cities, Atlantic City.
Right.
So is there a story that stands out that shocked you or something today?
Yeah. It's a random one. The one that comes to mind right now in this moment is a random one. It's actually a story that I heard about, well, two. Can I say two?
Absolutely.
The first one was from a Black man that was living in San Francisco, in a neighborhood that was going through various stages of gentrification and urban renewal, right? And I was asking him about being Black in the city, and he felt that living in the city and decisions that the city was making, it made him feel like he was part of the temporary fabric of the city.
Wow.
I was like, temporary fabric of the city. And it gave rise to this thought that people can live in a city and not feel intimately connected with it, or not think that they're going to necessarily be there in the future, right? And that really stuck with me. That really stuck with me. And that got me thinking about, what does longevity and stability mean in the city, right? And so that was one story that really stuck with me.
Wow.
And then the other one, many years later, so a couple years ago, because that was back when I was doing my master's research, I started studying historic Black beaches.
Wow.
Yeah, and this particular one was in New Orleans, Lincoln Beach, which I suggest everyone look up. They have a really wonderful history, and I went there to study. It was an abandoned amusement park that was on the beach.
Wow.
That was for Black folk there, because they couldn't go to the one down the street, which was on Lake Pontchartrain, which is a beach there. And so I was talking to a woman and her experience growing up of going to Lincoln Beach and how wonderful it was. And her little brother would go on the bus very young at like 8. But that sounds crazy to us. But she was talking about how everything was safe and how community would watch over her. And she got older, and she was telling me about her experience trying to be a mother in her family and doing domestic work, right?
Wow.
And she told me about the negotiation conversation she had with a white family. And the white family wanted her to essentially be an au pair, to live in the house, and take care of them. And she was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stay with my family, and I will come here during the day. Right? I'll take care of your kids during the day, but I want to be with my family at night. And that just really got me, right? It really made me think about that as a political decision, right? To stay home with my family, right? Rather than be someone's, live-in mammy. And so it just kind of stuck out to me, the decisions that a lot of Black families have to make just to remain in your home, to be stable, to be there for your kids. It's quite a bit. It's quite a bit. And, my family also has histories of being in domestic work, which, is fine, of course. but it's just in terms of the constraints that they have for work, right? It really kind of stuck with me. So
Let's talk about the G word since you brought it up.
which one?
Gentrification.
Oh, gentrification. I was like, wait, which one?
It's a very, very heated word. Very discussed all the time for years, and we see
Right.
what's happening in our cities. What is your view on gentrification? Because there are some folks like myself, I think we get caught up in the word itself, right?
Right.
And who wouldn't want more investment back into communities that were been disinvested for years?
Right.
In your view, how do we do gentrification that minimizes or gets in a more equitable way that doesn't involve displacement of the people that you've talked to who the story of the man said, like, I don't feel like I'm gonna be a part. That's sad.
I know.
To hear someone say, like, I live here, but I don't think I'm gonna be a part of this community in the future. That's sad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So gentrification, I agree. It's a very trendy word, right, to describe a kind of economic and social process. So that's how I look at it. I look at it as an economic and social process that, brings in a particular economic group to the city, right? Black folks can be gentrifiers as well,
Absolutely.
right? I gentrified Cobbs Creek at the time when I was living there. I had the house.
We don't think about that though.
We
We don't
don't.
think about Black folks being gentrifiers. That's talk a little bit more
Yeah,
about
well, my
that.
son
'Cause
reminded
you're from
me.
Mount Airy. So
Yeah. No, my son reminded me. He was like, Mom, we had the nicest house on the block. And I was like, oh, yeah. Because
Yeah.
we're all complicit to a degree, right?
Absolutely.
But for me, I couldn't afford a university city, right,
Mm.
closer to the school. And so that they were going. I could only afford in Cobbs Creek, right, because I didn't have wealth to draw from. But yeah, I mean, I think more people need to talk about it. I mean, I brought to Cobbs Creek my education. Now, to be fair, a part of my family was originally also from Cobbs Creek.
Okay.
But when I wanted to buy a house there, they thought it was very stigmatized, and they were concerned for me,
Wow.
right? And so it wound up. We had a good experience there, but things got a little rough. There was definitely a car that hit my home. And there were a couple fires, and just that corner was so poorly planned,
Yeah,
right? So a
right.
lot of people don't realize that a lot of this is the
spatial
impact,
yeah.
of poor planning,
Yep.
right? And packing a bunch of people in a
Yep.
neighborhood, right? Historically. So I think gentrification is a trendy term that's used, and the impact of it is also displacement. But on the other hand, a lot of Black folks that own their home really appreciate the street light being fixed, right?
Oh, come on. Just
They
talk about
they
it.
appreciate the park being kept up.
Hell yeah. You appreciate, ordinance being followed, right?
That should have been followed.
That should be followed. That's on the city books that nobody do in the poor neighborhoods.
And when white residents move in, their social capital.
You're going to get me in trouble. You're like, come on, white people.
brings the attention.
Brings the intention.
But at the same time, if it's a little too much, then they buy out the neighborhood.
But this is where the politics comes in, right? This is where the politics. It is not of course, the local community members need to get engaged and make sure their community is not displaced.
Right.
But this is where the politicians play a role.
Right.
They have a responsibility to make sure investment is done in an equitable way.
Right.
And this doesn't happen way too often. This doesn't happen.
Right.
And so gentrification becomes this bad word.
Right.
And people miss the point. We're focusing on gentrification and not focusing on the disinvestment or the inequitable investment coming back in the community.
Right. And also a lot of folks, a lot of residents that I talk to, especially older Black residents, they're not anti-white people moving in. They don't like the inequities of that, right? They don't like the fact that maybe a store that they've always gone to, right? There's a particular corner store in Fairmount that now is a sandwich shop. And I would eat at that sandwich shop, you know what I mean? But it's just like the constant changes.
Yeah.
Right, that they feel are out of their control. And then just the outright disparity of having a house that's crumbling, right, next to a house that was owned by the Philadelphia Housing Authority.
Yeah.
So I'm talking about the Fairmount house fire that happened a couple of years ago,
Yeah.
right? Of a Philadelphia housing authority dwelling, right, in a row home in Fairmount, which is a gentrified
Yeah.
neighborhood near the art museum. And just the fact that they may share a wall,
Hmm.
right, but they have completely different realities,
Yeah.
right? But by and still, right, there still is this question of I'm glad, I want to stay here, I want to live here, but can I continue to afford here,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you knew, but a couple years ago, I was asked to help lead with two other community leaders a group called Gentrification in King Sessing.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And we met in the bottom of the King Sessing Library, pre-COVID, packed basement.
Now, what was that meeting
Interracial
about?
too. It was
Really?
interracial. Yeah, it was the beginning of a gentrification in King Sessing group, um, led by a community leader in Southwest. And actually we were linked in with another faith leader. They were both faith leaders. We were linked in with another one, maybe through Power.
Hmm.
Um, and so I forgot the acronym for Power.
I forget, but I know the
Yeah,
organizing agreement.
yeah, it's an
Yeah.
interfaith
Hmm.
organization. And people, we're talking about gentrification, and the leaders are like, let's get in the basement of this library and talk about this thing.
Hmm.
And so it was a packed house,
Hmm.
right? Um, New residents, older residents, and a couple other elected community officials. Yeah, and we
Wow.
had kind of a town hall group discussion about some of the concerns and issues that came up.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's how these discussions are supposed to happen. I believe it's not so much the gentrification word; it's about bringing people together.
Hmm.
And I say, come on, white people. There's not white people that brings value. It's just what happens is they tend to, our city officials tend to pay more attention to code enforcement now.
Hmm. Hmm.
They pay attention to, the signs that say "Do not park here," and before they got there, everybody parks there, but all of a sudden, people are getting
Right.
ticketed and towed. Like,
Right.
so, community life is different
Right.
when these particular folks come, or higher income, because Black folks too are
Hmm.
gentrifiers, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's a healthy conversation to talk about. And you wrote about this. I think one of the stories you wrote about, articles you wrote about, why can't gentrification fix what's here now, or something like. You remember that?
Right. Right. In
Talk a little
Atlantic
about.
City.
Yes, tell me about
Yeah.
that.
So that was a piece that I did with my student, and that was based on the research that I've been doing in the North Side. And I got to put a plug in for my book by
Absolutely.
Rutgers University Press. It's going to be called No More Dual City, The Fate of Atlantic City.
Wow.
No More Dual City, The Fate of Atlantic City. And really, it's a story of the North Side,
Hmm.
which is it was the segregated Black neighborhood that has
Hmm.
gone through so many different waves, right? Through segregation, urban renewal, Hurricane Sandy,
Hmm.
and then a municipal takeover,
Yeah.
right? And then I kind of come in and join in with other movements that were going on in Black Lives Matter. And then we brought you in.
Yeah.
so that story. But one of, I was doing interviews with my students, and there was one person that said, why can't gentrification fix what's already
Yeah.
here?
Yeah.
So to this point of now you want to enforce the codes,
Hmm.
right? Now you want
Street
to
lights are
pay
working.
attention, right? Or parks,
Yeah.
really the parks,
Yeah.
right? Um, and so they appreciated that, but they also feel like it, brought in this kind of Christopher Columbus mentality,
Hmm.
right? And it's done differently in other places. Like I think we need to be careful not to assume that gentrification or different types of urban development happens in the same way,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
Everywhere. But I really think it's important to get those specific histories,
Hmm.
right? So I've been doing that work on the North Side.
Wow. That's
Hmm.
incredible. I think, we talk about these issues and the complex that surrounds redevelopment and planning. And I know I'm gonna get in trouble for this. I think part of Philadelphia's issues is the councilmatic prerogative, where you have council members who control zoning in their particular district. There's no unified zoning in Philadelphia where you can do some more regional planning that's more. I think the city needs to look at from a regional perspective and plan accordingly.
Hmm.
We can't do that because the councilmatic prerogative, and so that creates these little kingdoms, kind of like sort of New Jersey, where we have 566 municipalities.
Right.
You drive right down the street, it's a whole different community, a whole different city officials, and you got to plan. So
True.
that creates, chaos in many ways. And the people who are mostly impacted by that are people of color and poor people. And,
Yeah.
I think if we can get to this place where we can have a real conversation about race, politics, and religion, I think we'll be in a more healthier place.
Right.
And so this issue about racial politics, let's talk a little bit about that and your experience around that and how that's utilized to
Right. Yeah, well, I've learned about racial politics more from the kind of inner workings, right? So kind of intra-community, intra-Black community politics. And I first learned about that when I was in San Francisco. I was studying those that were part of this one social movement, but then I was studying with those who were part of the city's initiatives, right? And then, I started hearing the plantation, imagery, right? Right. That's the house Negro working for the city, right? And then I was like, oh, because I came from Philly and we have a strong middle class. In San Francisco, no.
Really?
Yeah. They live in Oakland, right? They'll come over from Oakland, but in terms of living in San Francisco, no.
Wow.
In terms of a large number. And so there I was like, interesting, because, we come from a more middle of the road over here. And so I was like, okay. And I think they were about, at the time, 12 to 13% of the population of San Francisco. And many of them were in the Fillmore, which is where I studied. And so that's when I first began to kind of hear about this in another setting outside of this region. And the church was very much involved as well, right? There were certain church leaders who were real estate, moguls, and grassroots community members had opinions about that. And so I was like, okay. But when I would talk to both groups, they both feel like they're advancing the Black community
That's interesting.
through different routes. And that's when I was like, okay, there's something here that a lot of people are missing. Right. Especially when you're, cherry picked by the city, oh, well, I have Black representation. See, I have Reverend so-and-so. And they'll be like, well, he's a sellout. I mean, they would simply say
he's been bought and sold.
Right.
Yeah.
Literally those
We
terms.
got him here in New Jersey too.
Right. Those terms, and sometimes it'd be a church name and corporation.
Christina, you gonna get me in trouble, isn't it? Some of these house Negroes that have a reverend at the end of their name, the Dr. King, I love what Dr. King said. There are people who were with me because they were against something, not necessarily they wanted genuine equality. And that's a difference. That's a big difference when folks are looking out for themselves and their own individual organizations and communities.
Right.
But,
well, and the irony of, a lot of these, and again, they were good-natured people that really wanted the best. It's just that they wanted to go through these very capitalist means to do so. And they were very much okay with just throwing Black on the front of something, right? So if it was as long as the Black development, it was okay, right? And then I'd go into the community and they would then paint these initiatives as evil, because I was actually working with it was a Christian and Muslim movement in San Francisco. And it was Black, Latino, and Samoan.
wow.
Yeah, I know. I was just like, how do you get yourselves in these very interesting situations? And so the way that they were kind of painting this other team, which, and I understood, I got where, but I learned that capital and finances played a lot into that, and who was asked to the table, the decision-making table, really made a difference.
Yeah, I think we do a disservice when we think about things like good people versus bad people, because it's not necessarily the case. But we live in a capitalistic country, and so cash moves everything around me. Dollar bill,
right?
Like that's that's how we move,
right?
And it's interesting that because of that situation, right? And we do have this classism that exists within the African American community, right?
Right.
That's real. And we do have to figure out how do we navigate that. And from your perspective, had that always been a part? Like, so, you know, we act like it's new. Is it really new, Professor?
I don't think so.
Mm.
You know, and I very much identify as a Boisean. I'll say this at first, and you know where I'm going.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know, we had the talented 10.
Yes.
Okay. And, you know, again, I'm a Du Boisian, but I had some things that me and Du Bois maybe didn't agree with,
Mhm.
right? But what I try to do, you know, so first read of that, well, Du Bois is elitist, right? But when you think about and do another read, you're realizing you have to think about the climate of that time,
Yeah.
right? They were only willing to accept a tenth of us,
Yeah.
right? And you had to be the cream of the crop,
Yeah.
right? To be respected, if that was really true. And so, but I mean, even back in times like during slavery, you know, the combination of how light you were,
Yeah.
right, impacted your social mobility,
Absolutely.
right, and how much you were being used by the system, right? Um, and so that was really, really important. You know, I think about passing,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And my family probably did this more than I would like to admit, right down in South Carolina, where my family's from. And my family was interracial back then as well. And so to be able to have access to this post office, right,
Mm-hmm.
they would try to pass, or even churches, they would try to pass as white,
Yeah.
right? And so we don't like this history, right? It feels sticky,
It's a
but
sticky
I
situation.
look at it as a ladder, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how many ways have we did that through a combination of class, education, and skin tone?
I mean, these are very important, and we don't have a lot of time to dig deep into this stuff, but these are
Right.
very deep conversations that we have to have. You know, I
Mhm.
always think about, you know, when we talk about race and color in classes, J.A. Rogers wrote a series on sex and race.
Mhm.
Joel Augustus Rogers, brilliant scholar around these issues of, and he talked about, you know, we've all been integrated. Like Baldwin said this, y'all motherfuckers don't know. We like my grandmother was raped by a white man. Like we've all
Right.
been. There is no pure race of anything. And matter of fact, Baldwin says there's not. And I keep repeating this not because I'm trying to point out white people, because I don't believe in the concept of white people. There is not a white person who can prove that they're white because they were French, they were Dutch. And what the assimilation process does to you in this country
Right.
is just strip you of everything that you know your ethnic background.
Right. Right.
And then we're all put in this pot fighting for crumbs
Right.
while
Yeah.
the elites, you know, take everything.
Exactly.
And so these are discussions. That's why, you know, we got to have these discussions about race, religion, and politics, because they all play a role in a capitalistic country that exploits.
Right.
Right? We're
Right.
all being exploited.
Right.
And we're fighting over these things that are distraction from,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, how do we build a community that is confronting gentrification in a more equitable way? How can we fix that?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the conversation we're not having.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And to me, I feel like the answer is community power. I think that we have so much power from below. I mean, we can, whatever imagery we want to use, um, I feel like we have a lot of power there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I really do a lot more neighborhood activism and neighborhood collective type of organizing around like our resources and really solving problems together. So I'm on the Mount Airy Diversity Committee. I do a lot of work with them, and I do a lot of tenant activism with West Mount Airy neighbors, because to me, um, the position of, you know, tenants, right, in Philadelphia. I mean, you know,
Gosh.
right? I mean, the most immediate work we need to be doing is coming together despite our differences and creating strong communities. So I try not to like limit myself to a very small window of what we can do. I really think that there's a lot that we can do to preserve communities and promote more stability. Because this is the thing, even if you are not a person of color and you know are a white gentrifier, it actually impacts everyone, right? For us to live peacefully in our communities, right? So you may not own that house next door, right? But that connection here contributes to peacefulness in the city, civility in the city, um, how and when and if we call the police, right, on different issues. talking to each other, right? So I hear of a lot of elders wanting to bring back that ability, like to get a couple sugar from a neighbor,
Yeah.
right? And that,
You remember that?
right. Remember that. And I would argue in my book, a lot of Black residents attribute that leaving when integration happened.
Mm-hmm.
And not to say that people shouldn't live together, but when you pack a bunch of people in an area,
Mm-hmm.
right, build up their businesses, because that's all we could do,
Mm-hmm.
then you disband it,
Mm-hmm.
their businesses close down because now they can go wherever they want. What happens?
Ooh, Christina, you done open. We gotta close, but you open. I'm ready to write a blog about this because, again, it's like the G word. We blame gentrification. Integration is the same. We blame integration. It wasn't integration. It was the lack of economic investment,
Right.
the capital that these Black businesses needed, right? And the proper planning for our Black communities to prepare. There are Black businesses who have thrived after integration. There are many. And so these stories aren't told. And so we're constantly talking about integration around the Black community. No, it didn't. We weren't prepared for it. And even today, we still don't have access to capital that we should. So I want to get into, we can't now, but maybe we'll have you come back. But I'm going to write a blog about this because I hear that all the time because, me and my business partner, Emilio Panacci, we developed the 5 C's of community cohesion throughout the years and years of research and study and meeting with communities and talking to people about racial and economic integration. And we never fully embraced that in this country. So this is not integration itself.
Right.
It is the lack of access to capital for Black businesses, the lack of planning. I was down in Miami last week, and I went to visit the Hampton Museum. It is the hotel where when Black actors couldn't stay in Miami, couldn't stay in the hotels in Miami. And so remember the final night in Miami where they had the documentary or the film about Ali, Malcolm X, Sam Cooke. They met in this hotel in Miami.
I didn't hear it.
I went to visit that space. It's called the Hampton Museum or something like that in Miami. And I toured, and when I was talking to the gentleman who gave me a tour, and we was having this conversation about integration. He said, Eric, we just weren't prepared. It wasn't integration.
Right.
And it was that lack of access to capital.
Right.
So these are the conversations we're trying to have instead of blaming. So what was the alternative? And I stopped talking this.
Right.
What was the alternative? Continued segregation? Is that the alternative?
Right. That's a good question. At least in Atlantic City, I think that during that time when we were transitioning to being an integrated, people bring up a difference between integration and desegregation.
That's those two distinct different things, right?
Talk
about
that.
We got to go, but let's talk about it.
And so people would say that we may have been desegregated.
Right.
But not truly integrated, right? And it's so we had this integration, but the grooves and the tracks were already set, and there wasn't as much help, at least in Atlantic City, to really support and help transition these businesses, right? I'm thinking of Washa Seafood, big Black-owned restaurant that was up. It used to be. I thought you were going to say before we were talking. It used to be a spot on the Green Book.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So, the places that Black travelers, safe places that Black travelers could go to. And it, moved locations, and I talk about this in my book, but it had a hard time trying to access these business loans, right? And other businesses in Atlantic City. So my answer has been that I think that as things are transitioning, things are getting more expensive. I really think we need to protect community pillars.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that we need to protect Black community anchors, right, in the city. And that could be restaurants, that could be churches, right? Because I feel like if those mosques, right? I feel like if those things were protected and still there and able to promote more longevity, I feel that people would be more rooted to their places, right?
That is so powerful.
But much more to talk about.
Yeah, and that is so powerful. And I think that, and I'm gonna write about this in my upcoming blog, because I think, this is where I admired Reverend Leon Sullivan and grew up in the city and what he did with Hope Plaza. The first Black-owned open mall. Progress Plaza. I'm sorry, Progress Plaza, right on Temple's
Temple.
campus.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
Black owned.
Where the fresh
That was
grocery
the
is?
first. Yes, that was the first
didn't know
Black
that.
owned open air mall in the country.
I did not know that.
That's Black owned.
Wow.
Yes, and so that's an example of coming out of. Reverend Sullivan was prepared. You know, he talked about. He actually helped King build the economic situation about the bus boycotts. You got to hit him in the pocket, bro. You got to.
Right.
So these are stories again that we don't know, that we got to share. They're going to pass down that how our ancestors were able to survive, and now our community is trying to get to the place where we want to thrive. And having these conversations are important. These stories are important.
Exactly.
And we got to wrap up, but I want to just for a moment, like if a young person was starting out, what would you give a young Christina? What advice would you give to want to get involved in really building community?
Well, like I said, I'm a big fan of neighborhood activism, and I think people should be involved. I think people should be involved in the issues of our day, right? Du Bois also said that as well. I think if we live in our neighborhoods and we have our silos up and we go into our car and we come back in, we don't realize the development down the street, right, that has 51 L&I violations, right? Those are our neighbors, right? And so I think that we should be aware, we should be open of the issues of our day that are in our community. And I would caution against being very, I'm blanking on a word, of course, right now, but to really look at a variety of different groups, right? Because I think sometimes we get with certain groups and we get very tunnel vision, right? And so I would say to sit back and listen, first of all, right? Instead of coming in and trying to change things, really listen to find out what people need, right?
Wow, it's powerful.
And I'm all about social determinants of health, and what are the ways that our community and everyone who lives in it at the time, right? What do we need to live full lives, right? To work, to play, to just really live full. And that's where I think we should start from, right?
Wow.
And that might be, bipartisan, that might be interracial, but I definitely want my work to support the working class of cities so that they can actually stay, right?
That's powerful. And unfortunately, we didn't get into your background and documenting the jazz history for the Clef Club. You got to look up Professor Jackson's bio, go on her website, because she's done tremendous work around jazz and everything you're doing. I mean, I just adore you every time I see you. It's just like this energy around how creative you are. And we had Don E. Camp on, and then he reminds me that we all love creative artists. He's a brilliant artist. Senator Singleton mentioned about listening. That's another thing that he said. We have to listen more.
We do.
And that's so powerful. So the last thing I'm going to ask is, we always end our podcast with our guests. What is one of the most popular or famous quotes that you like, and why?
Yes.
You want to quote? Give us a
have
quote.
one.
Okay.
Right. I wrote it down because I didn't want to forget it. And this quote is upon first read, it may not feel like it has anything to do with what we talked about, but I argue that it does.
So,
okay.
I mean, whatever you.
And this is the quote. It says, "And the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom."
Wow.
And that was by Anais Nin. And for me, I took that to read that it could be somewhat scary, right? To kind of have these open discussions, right? Of race and politics and religion. But to me, I would rather be in the struggle with folks, right? And be in the conversation with folks. Then I think it's more painful, right, to stay in our own silos, right? And so, I feel like the answer is community, and we shouldn't be afraid to be able to cross those bridges. So,
thank you so much, Professor Jackson. It's always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you so much.
You're so inspiring, and navigating realities where dialogue meets understanding is really about to have these type conversations where people don't want to have, or not having the space to have them, right, in a safe space to have them. So, I'm always appreciative of folks like yourself coming on, having these deep discussions, and we're going to end with that. And I'll just say, as Usher Raymond says, let's go deeper than the surface,
Right.
and farther than the end. That's one of the songs that he closes with. So
I love that.
Thank you for
Thank
coming.
you.
That's a wrap.
All right.
Thank you for listening. I'm Reverend Eric Dobson, and this was Navigating Realities, where dialogue meets understanding. Follow and subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, and tune in on all streaming platforms. See you next time.